the premise that we kind of, how we tied the 3 workshops together. So basically, when we integrate identities, our identities as people and students, we integrate our students into our activities and we integrate our learning styles. We are likely to create a learning, caring learning community. And then because we create a caring learning community, then our students are far more likely to adopt the learning outcomes naturally. It's not one of those things that's on the side that we never talk about, but they start to adopt those. And then because they adopt the learning outcomes, they're far more likely to be motivated to participate in our experiential education activities. Sometimes they think of them as that check off list, something I have to do, but if we kind of follow this model, we get to a point where they want to participate and they're motivated to do it in a meaningful way where it makes it's more meaningful to them. And then because of that experience, then we're helping them develop the skills that our employers would like to have. You know, the content is very important, but these are those skills that employers are looking for, almost more importantly than the content. They really want to have students that are ready for them. And not only that, but that it makes them feel fulfilled in life. And then just one more thing I'm going to say, and then I'm going to introduce you to Briget Eastep. I just want to remind you, I do want to say something even way more important. I want to thank the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning for inviting us to come and present. Tony Pellegrini is on the committee, the board of the CETL, is putting together workshops for us to be better, and I'm really grateful to, that they invited us to be here. Sorry, I went a little bit too far because I was just want to remind you about 3 other opportunities where you can learn more about what we've covered. It's been a very quick, fast shot in the arm. Some of our feedback is we wish we could slow down and enjoyed it a little bit more, and we got a little deeper. Of course, that's the nature of these when you do 3 quick workshops. But please come and join us. The Intermountain Teaching for Learning Conference, sponsored by the Consortium for Faculty, Intermountain Consortium for Faculty Development, will be at UVU March 30th and 31st, and then our own Experiential Learning and Leadership Institute conference in June 26th to 29th in Park City. And I was telling Tony, I'm engaged in the conference, but not to a point where I can be biased yet. I just want you to know that when I say one of the best conferences I've been to as a presenter as well as a participant. So if you get a chance, come and join us. And then our National Society for Experiential Education, which offers these courses that you can take half-day workshops. There are 6 of them. When you're done, you graduate from your Experiential Education Academy, and they and then you get a certificate that says you're certified in Experiential Education. Adds another layer to your academic scholarly activity. I will let you know, sorry to do one more thing if you don't mind. Today in our leadership meeting for the School of Integrated and Engaged Learning, we learned something that kind of ties into what we're doing here that it hasn't been announced yet, and I'm not sure if I'm overstepping my boundaries. And we have CO people here, so don't go back until Patrick and opening my big mouth. But we did learn today that everything that we do now, we will have to say how we tie back to the strategic plan. And so when you look in your binders, go look back at that. You will see all the highlighting, all the things that you touched on, that we touched on and learned a little bit about under that strategic plan. We'll have to report back for it if we want funding for anything. We'll have to tie back into that plan. So get comfortable with that document, and then claim this workshop as your scholarly activity leading towards what we're planning to do as a university. And with that, I want to introduce you to Briget Eastep. She'll get out of this from. She's our director of our Outdoor Engagement Center, and she is somebody that I really enjoy listening to and learning from. She's I graduated from the academy and Bridget's further along than I am in experiential education. I think you'll enjoy the presentation. So, thank you.
Hi, welcome back. I missed last week, but I'm hoping that by going through experiential learning and looking at it as kind of a pedagogy and a way of practicing, that it'll make sense for integrative learning and it'll make sense also for service learning, because it really gives you some basic good practices in education with it. So what I hope today is that remember or have a concept of what integrative learning is. That from Earl last week, you can bring up images and words that describe what engaged learning is. And then today, I hope to go through experiential learning and to just give you all what it is and what it isn't. The experiential learning process, which Earl did show you last week, this whole cycle that we're going to dig in a little bit into. The role of the student and the role of the educator within it. And that's actually going to be interactive. You'll get to pick it up and make it up. In that, best practices in experiential learning, again, going back to the National Society for Experiential Education. And then, in the end, going through those best practices. And I've been thinking about this. I'm wondering if you can turn anything into an experiential learning experience. So that's going to be the challenge for today. I look at like music, and I was like, oh yeah, not that. But there's layers that you can dig into and just think about what you're doing. So the experiential learning cycle comes from David Cole, and he really started publishing about this in 1984. But his ideas really come back to John Dewey and looking at what experiential education is and putting it in the context of traditional education versus progressive, which I'll talk about a little bit more. But really, it starts with a concrete learning experience. From that experience and things that make it an experiential learning process is that you go and you make observations and reflections about that experience. So you're going to be reading a text, and if you go back to that text and you observe, like, oh, what did I read? What does it mean to me? Then you're starting in that cycle. The next is the formation of abstract concepts and generalizations. So you're taking those ideas and you're applying it to what you're learning in the course, what you're learning over a lesson, that you're able to make those connections from that experience to other learning outcomes or what makes it relevant to your life in that. Then you take it to new situations, and hopefully you think differently, you act differently, you feel differently about it. So that experience changes. And then you're back in the concrete experience, and you just go around and around and around until you're busy. So I think that makes sense with it.
So that's a definition of experiential learning, or is just the cycle is different from the definition?
There's lots of definitions.
I'm sorry.
So what I would say, like the definition that I've used, and I'm paraphrasing it because I don't have it memorized, is that experiential learning is a learning process that gets people to have an experience and then to put that experience in connection to other concepts and to their lives.
Isn't that what we do anyway?
In many cases, yeah. And there are a lot of people who teach in very like practical disciplines here, and you'll say, oh, this is what I've been doing. So there's a very rich background, and some people just do this automatically. Yeah.
I just wanted to add early what your call-up cycle is just a framework. If you are doing it anyway and you don't know how to, validate it or document it, this is a framework that you can use. It kind of creates boundaries. So it's a framework.
Only the questions at the end will help you understand that, like, what it is and what it isn't.
Well, so yeah, I don't want to belabor, but I was just sort of thinking, look at the question, you think, well, it's kind of like a lab, maybe, I don't teach chemistry. So, but,
You know, yeah, I actually think of my K a lot when I was putting this together.
oh, no, but so chemistry, you know, courses like that, it makes sense to have the lab, because otherwise if you're just studying electron orbitals or something like, you know, but that's like hands-on, and I feel like, and I don't know if this is my question, is experiential learning adding a component, so it's not just hands-on, but so that it's actually, okay. There we go.
We're going there.
Got it.
Yeah, in this slide and in the next slide, it really is like talking about what it is and what it looks like within it. Because again, experiential education is a huge basket within it. And there's interactive activities, there's service learning activities, there's labs and internships and community engagement and global engagement and outdoor engagement and all these things that everybody kind of throws into this experiential education basket. But not all of them actually turn into experiential learning processes or experiential learning, I guess, pedagogy, because the whole process is not utilized, if that makes sense. So even in a lab, which is very hands-on, you can go through the whole lab and you can do the lab perfectly and go through all the exercises. But again, if you haven't made that connection to like, oh, how does this fit in with the concepts of this course? What does it allow me to do? What did I learn from it? If those kind of metacognition connections aren't made, and it's not experiential learning. That makes sense. Yeah.
I think the simplest case is working with elementary, primary grade mathematics, where you work with many children start learning the concept of addition in a very abstract level, where they're using abstract shapes we call numbers and symbols like addition or subtraction or multiplication to come up with an answer. And so they'll have 2 + 3 = 5, and it's all very abstract. It's numbers on a piece of paper. A simple way to transition that into experiencing it is to actually having them adding and subtracting and dividing with manipulatives, where they're using their hands, and they're now getting into something that's closer to an experiential learning. If they have to divide up a bag of candy between 4 of them, then they're in a full-blown experiential learning activity that involves using division.
Yeah. And then they have to go back and actually make that connection.
Yeah.
And that's what the reflection piece of it does. So I put Dewey up here because he started like in 1910. He wrote about like how we think, and in that he really started looking at different types of education that he saw out in the educational system. And he found that there was a lot of traditional education, which is the education that I know that I grew up with, and I imagine a lot of you grew up with. Is like it's the you have students and you have a professor kind of looks like this in it, and really the idea is that the professor is pouring the knowledge into the students, and the students are just soaking it up and walking out the door. And there's definitely a place for that in the traditional, like it's a type of education that works. On the other side of it was progressive education. And the extreme of this is that you would have people that are like, just send your students outside and let them discover the world. And then you can just watch the light bulbs go off. And Dewey did not he was like, that's not good education, that's just children running wild, or kids running wild. So he really kind of pulled it in and was trying to base education in experience, and really started the question of like, where does hands-on stuff come on? And how do people actually learn in it? So I interviewed a bunch of students this week for outdoor engagement assistant position. And I asked every one of them, like, how do you learn out there? The answer across like all 10 of them was like, I'm a hands-on learner. Like, oh, what does that mean? And it really comes back to the things that you all have said, is that it's like they need to be able to take what they're learning and to actually use it in some way. But then have the light bulb go off that they can recognize that they've learned it, or that it's made a connection to another part of their life, or that is added on to what they learned about the subjects that we teach. Does that make sense?
Briget, I know you didn't come last week, and Earl just barely touched on the NESI 8 principles. Are you going to go into
Oh,
that?
yeah, we're gonna go into much.
That's going to help you. She's going to
Yeah.
get to this. It's going to help you see there's 8 principles to a good experiential learning activity, and she's going to go into that. And we didn't go into it deep enough, and I think that's what everybody's been waiting for. So
Yeah.
thank you.
And that's really where we're gonna spend a lot of the time today is looking at those. But the other thing and this is my field, so you're just gonna have to deal with, there's a lot about word pictures in it. But I brought up these 4 things because they all could be experiential education and experiential learning, but they all, like that river trip, could just be a river trip without any learning objectives or learning outcomes with it. The classroom, they could be deep into an experiential learning process or lesson, sitting in their seats, thinking, interacting, talking with each other. So I brought up the picture of John Smith writing symbols in sand to just show that what it can look like outside. And he's one person that really helped me see like what experiential learning looks like in different activities. So he taught Communication 1010 in the semester in the parks last year. And a big chunk of his teaching was actually on the river trip. And he said that being out in the environment really made him rethink how to teach those concepts, because he had to try to bring in the environment to it. But still, he went through the whole process in it. So he was talking about language and symbols and how it kind of gets, I guess the good communication can get lost. And he had every single student write like a symbol that in the next like 10 minutes, the other students would come and try to interpret. So in it, he was just trying to get the point across of how difficult language really is, because of the sender and the receiver not getting the same picture or having the same interpretation of it. But the students, again, had that concrete experience where they drew a symbol in the sand. And then they had to go and they had to take that next thing is to like say, all right, what do I observe about these? And they had to go around and they had to observe the different symbols within it. And then they each interpreted it, and we all laughed really hard when they came up with their interpretations. So it was entertaining and interactive in that way. But then they had to come back to kind of that generalization and making those connections and bring it back to the concepts that John was introducing on how difficult it was to actually have language be our language and symbols be the thing that we rely on for good communication, because so often the interpretation is off. So they had to make all those generalizations, and then from there, he was hoping to see in the rest of the semester that they actually thought about that in their communication and had they sent clear messages in it. So that's kind of how he used this cycle to go all the way around with it. But it started with just like having a concrete experience of talking about symbols in the same. The river trip down below is actually students doing safety briefing as part of an outdoor leadership course. And so again, he was taking the concepts that he learned in risk management and turning it into an actual real life, if you don't listen to me, you could die sort of situation. Because they were going to interact with that in it for that. I brought up the other kind of staged trophy-looking students to show that in experiential learning and in learning in general, like students are going to be uncomfortable at times, and they are going to struggle, and I'm sure that we've all seen that, and I know it's like you just want to help them, but again, when they're going through that dissonance and trying to make those connections between the generalization and the new practice or the new thoughts that they're doing, they can't look like that. Yeah.
The safety instruction, how is it an experiential learning? Is giving them, you need to put your life jacket on, you need to keep your hands such and such. What's the difference between that and me telling them in the lab, have safety glasses on, put your coat on, blah, blah, don't wear tie and all these things? What makes that to be an experiential learning?
Because it's the student doing it. The student is experiencing what he learned in the classroom, doing it in real life.
But the students are not doing it at that moment.
But the person that's talking is a student.
Oh, it's experiential learning
Yes.
for that student,
Yes.
not the others.
Maybe not theirs.
No,
That's
I
what
just
it is.
I didn't catch that. Okay.
see, and that's the piece of it, is that, and this is what I really appreciate about the work that the National Society for Experiential Education did, is coming up with a set of principles of good practice. And in it, in order to be, like, experiential learning process needs to involve these kind of 8 different practices. And again, depending on where you are and what you're doing, like some of it will be like just a, oh yeah, we did that. Others will be more in depth. Like, so that student, again, was taking what he had learned in a classroom setting about risk management and go do homework, applying it to a river setting. And then he was really in charge of the safety of that group for that whole time.
So it was actually a little bit of peer teaching, or student teaching as well.
Yes.
And we know that students can learn each other as
Yes.
well as.
Yes, Vygotsky is huge in all of this, because his premise is that education is a social thing, and we learn by interacting with others, and we learn by interacting with the world. And again, we're going to see that within here. So to boil down the principles of good practice, the first thing, and this is where I think that it's an interesting conversation. Steve Barney went to LA last year, and I did a presentation on place-based learning. And he came up to me afterwards, and he was like, the thing that worries me about experiential education is that I feel like I'm not going to have a job anymore. Because the students are doing all the work, and the students are putting it all together. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is such a great paper to write someday. Because what it does is it actually ups the ante for the educator, because they have to set up the experiences and the kind of learning environment so the students can take on those roles. So it starts with really good intention. And it starts with knowing what you want the students to learn in it. So that's the first key of it. And then being able to set up those experiences so that it happens. The next one is preparedness and planning. And again, you can look at, we're going to go into who does what, students and educators after this, so you can kind of think about it in those. But in preparedness and planning, you have to look at it. Are you prepared to actually teach and be involved and make sure that the students can reach their learning outcomes in this way? And that's also where the planning comes into it, and being able to make those connections for yourself and for your students, and setting up that experience, whether it's going to be in a classroom with just interactive activities, or whether it's going to be out in the field. So, preparedness and planning. The next one, I think, is the really key piece, and that's authenticity. It has to be in an environment where the students actually get that real life feedback. in it. And this is where I had a really hard time coming from being a wilderness educator and being with students for 30 days at a time to like transferring to 50-minute portions at a university. Because I was like, oh my gosh, where's the authenticity in being in the classroom? But being able again to find that within it. And you can teach those concepts in an experiential way, but you just have to think about like, what's the concept and is this the best place to do it? So really looking at authentic experiences. And a lot of times this can come out in labs, it can come out in role playing, it can come out in case studies. So there's different ways that you can actually get involved with making things authentic and never leaving the classroom within it. I teach in outdoor recreation, so I get to take my students out a lot so that they get the immediate feedback from the environment and the people that they're with. The next piece that is key to it is having that reflection. And it goes again to the whole cycle and making those observations about what's happened and then the so what about it. So that the students are making that connection and having actually like recognizing that the light bulb went off. The next is orientation and training. This goes for safety, but also in making sure that you're not doing that progressive education thing that John Dewey didn't really like so much. But making sure the students have the skills and the knowledge to be successful at what you're asking them for. That makes sense. And then within it, monitoring and continuous improvement. Do you have those areas where you can do that like midway assessment to make sure that you're on the right track, or do you need to deviate your plan so that the students actually do get to those learning outcomes? And that leads right into a final assessment and evaluation of it, and then acknowledging and recognition is the last part of it. Actually, like having the students understand that an A in your class means that you have mastered all of these knowledge area or these skills or these abilities within it. And there's acknowledgement that way, but also acknowledgement and feedback that you get on course, on assignments, things like that. So those are all kinds of different ways that.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
On the last page, could you use a simple example of what you have experienced and done those steps?
Yeah. So I'll go back to the. All right, so I'll go back to just this river trip and give it an example. Like one of the course outcomes was that students were able to identify, mitigate, and manage risks in the field. So within that, every single day, somebody was the safety officer. And in that, they had to have the content that give the safety briefings, but then also the observations of what was happening in the environment and what was happening with their co-participants to be able to mitigate and keep those risks. So one of the things that they set up is that, all right, before we go and run rapids, we're going to stop, we're going to hike around, we're going to scope them out so that everybody knows where to go and what to do in that. And then at the end of the day, they came back and they had reflections in their journal, but they also had a debriefing session as to like, how did the day go? And how was the safety briefing in preparing us to do what we were going to do? And so the students got that immediate feedback, and at the end of it, they were able to, again, come back and show that they actually were able to identify, mitigate, and manage the risk. So that's from that picture and that experience.
Briget, another side benefit to this is other people in the boat are learning what worked and what didn't work.
Yes.
So that's their experience. So there is an experiential component to the ones that are sitting in not being the student at that moment or the safety officer.
And then the next day, when the next guy is the safety officer, he was like, oh, that did not work for that person. I'm going to try this. And so you can see that, again, Vygotsky comes in and it becomes social as well. But again, like not all students make those connections or do that. But what we found is that when you do go through the whole process and you're intentional about it, that those connections are made and students are able to make those connections and actually do better. So by the end, you have like these like really great safety brigades because people are like paying attention and you're like, so in the end, I'm going to give an example of like how you would do it with an activity, how you would do it with a class, and kind of overall course. So these are this is the IIC, it's the youth crew, and they're actually learning about cultural practices in creating a Wikipedia. So they learned about and the outcome was really to understand like the role of Wiki-apps within the Paiute tribes culture and how they had been used traditionally and how they're used today. And then they actually built a Wiki-app, but while they were doing that, they were actually talking about it the whole way. And they had elders there telling the stories as well in it. But then at the end, they did that reflection piece where they journaled about it and they were able to make those connections. The other piece that I think helps folks is to actually think, like, what's the educator doing in these different practices? What is the student doing in these different practices? So the goal is to make this a little interactive. So I can pass those up that way.
Thank you. I can't really count.
And not every box is going to be filled in. Or you put some, or did you get enough? Okay, thanks. Sure. So within it, not every box is going to be filled in. Unless you're like a student teacher.
So I have a question. Can I cheat? I just submitted a paper file with this framework for my capstone. So can I reflect on that?
Yeah, we can definitely do that. So if you go ahead and you fill it out and then share it with a group of 3 to 4 people and see if you all came up with the same things with it. And again, like what I'm expecting is like if you look at intention, the educator is identifying the intentions of the lesson or the activity. They're identifying the outcomes that they want the students to achieve. So students get to benefit by that outcome.
Briget, do you want me to put the website address up front on the board that people can look at that would explain each of those a little deeper? Like it talks about, it's our edge site. It talks about intention. Do you want me to put that up there so they are having a hard time kind of wrapping their
Sure.
Just give you the web addressing. It says use your device to go there.
And then if you've gone through that, go ahead and just flip around and see how all the pieces about this thing break out.
Oh, I just made a paper, that's what I'm doing. Oh, this is my phone here.
So your next.
I don't know how to do this. So capstone classes and science and this is the last one. Someone said they have a last one. Along with the invention. Students intend is that they get those life skills. No, I find where is political science?
So if you go to that site, it does explain what intention means.
It's just they choose which one they want. Preparedness and planning is that I meet the clients, but I also get the students involved. So the students get to meet us, have an involvement from the beginning, but then they choose between the three. It's interesting, most of them shift after they shift completely. They started on this project for the 16 days last year. Yes. And also presumption that this is going to be more interactive. And one of the aspects of the planning is that students will extend that planning. That they will extend one authenticity is that it's a government and it's a use. And then it's the reflection is that the assignments, they have to do process, progress, and if they did this project differently, how would it end? In the end, what do they do this time? Students' reflection is that assignments were strict deadlines. That I don't change in 5 minutes. They take out because that's authentication. Orientation. So in this picture, I guess, so I know, so it takes 6 years of time. Orientation is like in many we have training of those businesses in us, and the students create their own training. So that training what they create is a part of the salary goes to the next capstone class. So they are the ones who become sub-clients. And monitoring is weekly meetings, continuous improvements, assessments as assignments. They evaluate each other. So they have the project management, they have communication, process, leadership, presentations. They evaluate all these criteria for their and they grade each other. And that's students who are so that's how they acknowledge, and in their documents, they write, it's not optional. It's quite a simple. It's quite a simple thing. Yes. So this actually took 6 years. It's not simple, but you can make it simple. I just did one point. Just one thing, but I use the folder. I use the folder. We're talking simply do it. We each feel We never go beyond how to. There are a ton of theories. Yes.
But now we're ready to go to and not realize we're teaching
All the time. But that's interesting. I think maybe because I actively publish a lot, but it's from my background. I always look at the theory and then my assignments. Always. Yes, it's why. Yes. Yes. I always look at the theory. I think I mentioned that in theory.
I will. There are some things that I do. Like students. Yeah. I'll explain them like, why are we doing this assignment, right? Like, what's the purpose of this? So it's not like I'm just doing this to torture you, right? Like there's outcomes here that I'm expecting you to get out of it. And so at least they get the theory of this thing, you know, which I think is important for them to know.
And I think it's going to feel different, but I've really experienced. I tell like protocol, I tell physical and I give them so it's not me the same.
Right.
So I always ask for it's not me, it's not me child.
Exactly. Professors who literally talk about those taxonomies and like design
Yes.
involved here.
Which helps. I think I'm using
There's a word.
The mindset is teaching doesn't require this. That mindset is yeah, if you don't know what's out there, or you can learn stuff and what's I always refine it. No, 6 years I've been doing this.
It's interesting.
Oh my gosh. I didn't just do it in classroom. I did it in the client.
I have 7 hours. One company.
Well, it's a great line to think of on their resume, it's not like a class. It's like, you know, I work for somebody.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is what
Professor. Yeah.
this is the definition I tell them in Harvard, they have a 2 weeks, and I tell them.
Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So what this group did, they're like, okay, I need to know this is what you're when I do it, that gave me the steps. Like you start with introduction, say order. It is, that's the wonder of the guidelines. But
You don't have to.
yeah, because I was thinking like some of the stuff like
I did the other way, I did this and this.
yeah, so and I'm thinking like reflection could be like way down here, you know, because like monitoring content that may be like over here. That's another.
But I think when the next you started it, the question was asked us, but now it's.
Yeah, so think about that, like when our this was like, you know, something else or something. Right, it wasn't like, oh, hey, let's have fun. Like, literally, understand why are these things separated. And these things, because they literally couldn't do it. If the game goes right, they're actually stuck.
And next time.
Because there was no winner in real life either, right?
And next time, let's say what to do it again. In different scenarios.
Yeah.
That's what I tell my students there's 2 goals. Team. If you learn something, take it.
Yes, that's experiential. That's what we do. Like that's, you know, it's not fun and experiential, but like you do, right?
Yeah, I don't know how to follow your instructions. You gotta give me some steps. And it's not about I even train them like you have to be able to communicate to get a job. So we have to present They're good.
Yeah, my survey students, we do like little 25 minute tests. I don't care what you go in, you're always going to be able to communicate your ideas clearly and efficiently. Yeah, I was like, your boss is going to give you 3 minutes. You know, you got 3 minutes to convince him to give you a raise. So. Just 3.
We have actually.
Forced you to be quick. They're painful. I've done them, but they are so much fun.
I don't know.
I did
Three
read them.
sentences. What are you doing? How are you doing it? So what? So 3 sentences. And
Yeah.
very good. But we had a project, we had one very history, and we did in startup, we did a chapter of 1980s history and Filipino. So we compared and contrast the future plate with European and world history and this was textbook. And it's almost 10 years again, and I thought it was in yeah. And now it's in
Plus we're getting weapons, like technology and culture and clothing.
Yes. The word game and gamification are two different things. They absolutely gamification and highly gamification. Yes. We think education is painful.
Yeah. I would say like the most compliment you can get out of a student, right? Like was this was so much, or you know, history was so great, but I love your class. Yeah.
Well, I was
Like
told
if you not hate history, that's well, usually it's because we're doing these hands-on experiential activities, right? It's amazing.
I would say my son, like, one of them goes, when the client comes in, I know about it, I'm like, no, so you're gonna say, yes, that's a great question, you get back to you. So they learn, yes.
I'm gonna bring us back. I think I got There's lots of different conversations. We only have like several.
He's got school and stuff.
I think you're changing everything.
The conversations that I heard around the room, the people are really, like nutrition and physiology and chemistry, they're like, well, we just do this because the stuff that we're dealing with is real. And that was one catch that people are like, what does authentic mean? And if you think about it, making something authentic is connecting it to the real world and making it so that they're able to, next time they come across a problem, actually like make those connections, like, oh, I know how to deal with this in it. So hopefully that makes sense. The other thing that I hope is that just going through those things too, is got you to think about like, what do I actually do when I teach? And how can I tweak it just a little bit more to actually make it more experiential and helping my students make those connections to the real world. And I think that having intention is great. And some of those intentions, again, can go back to SU's essential learning outcomes and having students like struggle through problems when problem solving, or having students think about the different courses they've taken and how it's being integrated in their answers within it. We had a good conversation over here about industry and engineering and problem solving, and really employers are like, well, we get graduates and they have all the knowledge, but we put them in place and they're not quite ready to do the problem solving and take the initiative that goes along with it. So those are other intentions that you can put into it, is like making it a real world experience so that the students like come into those situations when they're out of the classroom, when they're able to like stand up, take initiative, and actually solve the problem. So there's a lot of different ways that you can And the accordion thing, you can expand, put it in as to like what your intentions are.
Jane, can I share something about you that I just love? For experiential education, sometimes if you go to the experts, they'll talk about that it has to be outside of the classroom. And I just love Briget because she does not limit us to just going outside the classroom, even though her examples are outside of the classroom. She talks about how in the classroom, there can be experiential education opportunities. And our NFS person here asked that question, show me something that happens inside the classroom. Would you mind if she just shared, you told her your analysis of a diet, was that what it was? So some of us are doing these things that are real world in our classroom and it doesn't, and I love that Briget, sorry, don't mean to take all your time, but Briget kind of captures it out here, where some people you'll read about, it has to be outside of the classroom only. Don't get so confined there. I love that Briget goes, it can be inside or outside.
And it's,
But if outside warrants it,
but
then
the
outside.
key to me for that is that a lot of people do the preparing and the preparation and such, but to really make it an experiential learning experience, you've got to have that intention. So you need students to know what the outcomes are going to be for learning outcomes, or for your knowledge field, or in that. The second is that you need to give them the chance to reflect so that they are able to make those connections and to actually get into it. And then the third is the opposite. You need to connect it to the real world so that they understand like how this concept affects them, affects their futures, is actually in that problem solving thing. So you look at, again, what you're trying to get at, and you can do it at the activity level, you can do it for classes, you can do it for full courses. So this is a picture of the wilderness first responder that happens up at Bryce every May. And the course has activities that are experiential, and the course has activities that are very traditional within it. And those, again, those activities are aligned with what the outcomes are. So to actually learn how to put somebody in a litter, instead of just showing them on the screen, they actually bring in a litter and everybody gets to package them up so that they don't die of hypothermia when they throw them down the sludgy hill. But in that, under weeks. But so that's kind of at the activity level. That the classes that they have, again, some are very traditional. They're going over human anatomy and different body processes. And that ends up being like, all right, you just need to get this knowledge, and the best way for me to get this knowledge to you is to give it to you.
Yeah.
But then the other classes, to do splints and to actually practice like taking people's pulses and all that, are very hands-on. What makes them experiential though is at the end of the day, they come back and they have those reflections. They're like, okay, do you know how to do this? And then the reflections also come in like the practical tests. Like they actually get a scenario where, and I've been in scenarios in Zion where an asteroid hit Zion and we had to kill 8 people. So there was burns and there was like missing limbs. Like they really blow it up sometimes and have fun with it. But then we had to go and practice everything that we learned in the course to save all the people within it. And they give you makeup and they make it real as possible without calling the helicopter. And they're trying to figure out how to get the helicopter pilots to actually come in now. In that. But then that whole course is going to be experiential in the end, not because it's outside of the field and all that practice is happening, but because the students have a chance to reflect and understand how they're going to use it in the future. If that makes sense. So that's kind of like breaking it down really simply, like how it happens in just an activity, like what Lonnie started out with, and how to be integrative. How you can do it in classes, and again, that's the service learning part of it, and even putting in those service learning and those engaged learning pieces of it, those reflections are helping you make it experiential because that's where they're making the connection. And then over a whole course, it's like you, again, bringing those big concepts and having them actually be intentional. And so the end of it. I put this picture of it because these are outdoor rec majors and their spouses, and they're doing things that they learned in classes, but they graduated and they're still doing them. So, and they're taking their wives along. In some cases, they're taking their husbands along too, but in that. So it was just the best kind of picture that I had to show like what our end goal is overall, is to have students be lifelong learners so that they can go to work and be the folks that people go to when, what did you say, 500 gallons of water is coming out and needs to be fixed. So I hope that one, that this just gets to, as you think about like how you actually put together your courses, and how you can be intentional, add in reflection, and really make those authentic real world connections, and then call yourself an experiential educator from that. The best practices, again, like there are guidelines that I've found very useful. The group back there was like, oh, this isn't in order, and that's what's throwing me off. So they put it in order as like step 1, intention, step 2, where's the authentic part of it? And that is a way to just kind of operationalize it for you all as educators. But it is a pedagogy that really does help make those connections and to graduate students that are lifelong learners. So I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy to like take assignments or help you work through how to be an experiential educator. Pretty easy to find. They moved us over to, it's really funny, they moved the Outdoor Engagement Center into the Learning Engagement Center, or the Leadership Engagement Center. So we're now across the street from the PT buildings. And we're wanting to get prizes.
Yeah, thank you.